We shall move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? I'll give the call to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Given last night's cruel hoax of the budget, can the Prime Minister explain how struggling Australians, by giving them just 70 cents a day in 15 months' time, is going to help them with their mortgage, energy, insurance and grocery bills today?
Call to the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question, and he asked about people under cost of living pressure. The same guy who voted just earlier today against tax cuts. Tax cuts, where we've topped up the tax cuts from last year to deliver $2,500 for people, $2,500 in people's pockets that they said they'd oppose before they saw it, and then they said they would roll back, and then they called for an election a year ago. That's how much they hated it. They hated tax cuts. This is the mob that want to cut everything to pay for $600 billion of their nuclear reactors. They want to cut education. They want to cut health. But what they won't want to cut is people's income taxes. Mr Speaker, I'm asked about cost of living. Well, we have introduced, of course, not just the tax cuts for all. We've ensured that real wages are increasing 5 quarters in a row. When they were in office, they decreased 5 quarters in a row, not as an accident, not because of other factors, but because it was a deliberate design feature of the economic architecture. We also have produced, of course, energy bill relief, not one, not two, but 3 tranches of energy bill relief. We are delivering the largest investment into Medicare since Medicare was created. And in the health sector, we have, of course, tripled the bulk billing incentive, firstly for 11 million Australians. Then we've built on that for 25 million Australians in last night's budget with an $8.5 billion injection. But not just that. We also provided funding for 50 urgent care clinics so that people can go to the midpoint between their GP and an emergency department, and all they need is their Medicare card, Mr Speaker. That is all that they need. But they, of course, regard urgent care clinics as wasteful spending. And then, of course, we come to medicines, something that they oppose, and they oppose the 60-day dispensing. Well, we now have medicines down to $25, the same price that they were in 2004. We have free TAFE that they've opposed as well, Mr Speaker. There'll be a vote on that in the Senate later today to make it permanent, and we'll wait and see what those opposite have to do about that. But I suspect they'll oppose that as well. Every single measure they have opposed, every single one. And they, of course, have also opposed the actions that we've taken to get the budget in better nick.
The call to the honourable member for Gilmore.
My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government providing more cost of living relief to every taxpayer, and is there any opposition to this plan?
The call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, and I thank the member for her question. And indeed, every Australian taxpayer will get another tax cut, building on what we've delivered this year from next year. All 14 million, not just some. Taking that first marginal tax rate from 16 down to 15 and then down to 14, bringing the bottom tax rate to the lowest level it's been in over 50 years. Now, under the previous government's tax plan, of course, those earning under $45,000 would not have received a single cent. Not a cent.
Order.
And those opposite have been consistent because today they voted against those taxpayers getting a single cent again. 3 million Australians would have missed out on the tax cut. Well, we are delivering a tax cut for every taxpayer, not just some. Because of our government, the average tax cut for average taxpayers will be that $2,500. That makes an enormous difference to people, and it makes a difference when combined with cheaper childcare, fee-free TAFE, the other measures that we have put in place, our energy bill relief, our Medicare urgent care clinics, all of these measures making a difference. But at the same time, of course, we want workers to earn more as well, which is why we've changed the industrial relations system over measures like same job, same pay, over making sure that as well the casualisation definition is not abused, in making sure as well that people have the right to disconnect. And as well, we don't sledge people who work from home, unlike those opposite. If you combine those things together, think about this. He doesn't want people to work from home, but he doesn't want them to have a right to disconnect either. So he wants them on track 24 hours a day. Now, those opposite are against tax cuts for every taxpayer. It's consistent with an opposition that want to cut people's pay but don't want to cut people's taxes. That is what they want. He will always cut and Australians will always pay. And we know that the 2014 budget papers show very clearly, the $80 billion in cuts to education and health that were envisaged by 24-25 over 10 years. This guy was the health minister. I know that he wants to walk away from his record, but I assure him he'll get a few reminders over coming weeks.
Has concluded. Call to the Shadow Treasurer.
My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister's cruel hoax of a budget offers cash-strapped Australian families 70 cents a day in 15 months' time. Prime Minister, when Australians with a mortgage are $50,000 worse off under Labor, isn't this a budget for the next 5 weeks, not the next 5 years?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. It hasn't dawned on the Shadow Treasurer that he's asking that question on the same day that he voted against tax cuts for every Australian worker. Now, if the Shadow Treasurer genuinely cared about cost of living pressures and living standards in our economy, he would have voted for our tax cuts, but instead he voted against those tax cuts, Mr Speaker. This was the consequence of the brain snap that the Shadow Treasurer had in the budget lock-up yesterday, when he decided in the face of these cost of living pressures to recommend to his backbench that they vote against a tax cut for every Australian worker to help them with the cost of living. And that's why they're all looking at their phones and looking at their shoes, Mr Speaker, because they know once again that the Shadow Treasurer has been found out and he's been found wanting, Mr Speaker. This is why one of them, Mr Speaker, described the Shadow Treasurer to the Australian as a dead weight, Mr Speaker. I couldn't agree more. What the budget is all about is providing cost of living relief, cutting taxes for every Australian taxpayer, strengthening Medicare and building Australia's future. And it's disappointing, Mr Speaker, but not surprising to see that they voted against our tax cuts, because whenever we've tried to help Australians with the cost of living, they've tried to prevent it. And so as we get closer and closer to this election, when the Prime Minister calls it, Australians will have a very clear choice. This Labor government and this Prime Minister cutting taxes for every taxpayer and helping Australians with the cost of living, or that opposition leader who has a secret agenda for cuts which will make Australians worse off. As the Prime Minister said before, and I couldn't agree more, this opposition leader wants to cut everything except taxes for workers in our economy. So how dare they come up here and ask about living standards and ask about inflation, when they left us inflation multiples of what it is now and rising fast. And we've got inflation down, Mr Speaker, very substantially together as Australians. Now, Mr Speaker, another reason, in addition to the brain snap vote against tax cuts in the parliament this morning, the other reason that this question from the Shadow Treasurer is characteristically ham-fisted is because we got new inflation data today, actually, at about 11:30. And what that shows, inflation is down again. Headline inflation's down again. Underlying inflation is down again. It is a fraction of what we inherited from those opposite. So spare us the lectures about inflation and living standards. If you really cared about the cost of living, you would have voted for our tax cuts. Instead, you voted for higher taxes on every Australian worker. Well done.
Order. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the member for Hasluck.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. How will further investment in the Medicare urgent care clinics make it easier for Australians to see a doctor, and are there any risks?
Call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thanks, Speaker, and thanks to the member for Hasluck for that question. She remembers that at the last election we promised 50 Medicare urgent care clinics. They'd be open 7 days a week, extended hours and available for walk-in urgent appointments. But we didn't open 50, Mr Speaker. We opened 87 clinics, and already they've seen more than 1.2 million patients, a third of them seen on weekends and a third of them under the age of 15, but every single one of them fully bulk billed. All they needed to take was their Medicare card, Mr Speaker. They're not only getting terrific quality urgent care where and when they need it in their own community free of charge, they're also taking real pressure off our hospital emergency departments. And that's why, Mr Speaker, last night we funded 50 more urgent care clinics, including in Ellenbrook in the fast-growing northeastern suburbs of Perth, Mr Speaker. And once they're open, 4 in 5 Australians will live within a 20-minute drive of an urgent care clinic. More than 2 million patients will be seen every single year. Now, the opposition leadership have opposed this from day one. They've called it wasteful and opposed it. But like so many of the ideas from the Leader of the Opposition, the backbench is starting to take a different view. The young, energetic member for Casey back there, he loves urgent care. He loves urgent care. He's had a petition calling for a Medicare urgent care clinic in the Yarra Ranges. Imagine this, you wake up feeling unwell on a Saturday morning. It's not an emergency, but you need a doctor. That's why we need a Medicare urgent care clinic for the Yarra Ranges. And he'll be so pleased, Mr Speaker, that one of the 50 last night will be in the Yarra Ranges. He might not be so pleased that this bloke's opposed to it, Mr Speaker. We will support it. I say this to the member for Casey. We've got your back, sunshine, even if this bloke has left you high and dry. But I also say to the member for Casey, you shouldn't be surprised. This guy's never liked free Medicare services. He's always wanted American-style user-pays health care. That's why he tried to make everyone pay every time they went to the GP. That's why he tried to make everyone pay every time they went to a hospital emergency department. And he'll do it again, Mr Speaker, because he warned us last week. Past performance is the best indicator of this guy's future action. We know he'll cut the urgent care clinics and patients will end up paying, including patients in the Yarra Ranges.
Order. The member for Fisher is now warned. It's had a good go, but is now just going to not continue to interject, hopefully. Give the call to the member for Indi.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. In yesterday's budget, there was no new funding for the Growing Regions program or the Regional Partnerships and Precincts program, the two grant programs that fund critical infrastructure in regional Australia. $1 billion of funding was announced for roads in Victoria, but this was for Melbourne's suburbs. Treasurer, why is there so little new funding for infrastructure in regional Australia?
Order. The member for Riverina. Order. Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the member for Indi for her question. The regions are a big focus of the budget, and even in the member's own electorate, when you put together the 3 tax cuts that we are providing, the average tax cut's about $43 a week. The 30 clinics in Indi will be financially better off switching to bulk billing as a result of our reforms. We expect something like an extra 148,000 bulk billed visits in the honourable member's electorate by 2030 as a consequence of the investments in health that the Minister for Health secured in the budget and that we announced last night and previously. As I said, Mr Speaker, in the budget there are a number of important elements for the regions. I know that the member for Indi has mentioned two funds in particular. I acknowledge that. We have invested, I think, $1 billion, my colleague reminds me, in those two funds, one of them $600 million, one of them $400 million, and that's because we do believe in providing grant funding to the regions, and we're doing that in the most robust and responsible way that we can. But those aren't the only investments that we're making in regional Australia. You think about the investments the Communications Minister is making in the NBN. You think about the investments we're making in healthcare, in regional education. There are a whole range of investments in my own portfolio, making sure that banks stay open in the bush, making sure in the minister's portfolio that you have access to decent aviation services. And so the regions were a big focus of the budget. I know that the honourable member for Indi, I know that she won't mind me saying publicly what we talk about privately, very effective advocate for her local community, always seeking more funding and more advantages and more opportunities for her local community. But those two funds have already had $1 billion in them, and we're finding other ways to invest in the regions because we believe that as the Australian economy recovers, we want the regional economies to be a bigger and bigger part of the story, and that's what drives our investment in infrastructure, in particular in the regions.
Called on member for Blair.
Speaker, my question is to the Treasurer. How is the budget easing the pressure on Australians now while strengthening the economy for the future? What approaches have been ruled out?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The member for Blair is a terrific local member, and it's a real honour to serve with him here in the House of Representatives. As he knows, Mr Speaker, our budget last night was all about helping people with the cost of living, strengthening Medicare and building Australia's future. And in the communities that the member for Blair represents, the communities represented right around the room today, we know how important that is. And what the budget does is it tries to build on the progress that we're making together as Australians in our economy. We have got inflation down, real wages are up, unemployment is low, our debt is down, interest rates have started to be cut, and growth is rebounding solidly in our economy as well, with a bigger and bigger role for the private sector, which is especially welcome. Now, as I said before, Mr Speaker, in terms of a stronger economy that the member asked me about, we did get some very good news today on inflation. Monthly inflation fell to 2.4% in the lower half of the Reserve Bank's target range. Annual trim mean inflation fell as well to 2.7%, well within the band as well. And this reflects the very welcome, the very encouraging progress that we're making together as Australians on inflation. The budget last night forecast that inflation will come down quicker and sooner than was anticipated even at the end of last year. And what that reflects and what that recognises is, with all of the investment we're making in helping with the cost of living and strengthening Medicare, investing in every stage of education, investing in housing, making our economy more resilient in the face of all of this global economic uncertainty, is we found a way to do that consistent with inflation coming down further and faster in our economy. And what all of that means is that the soft landing in our economy that we've been planning for and preparing for now looks increasingly likely, Mr Speaker. The Australian economy is genuinely turning a corner, and we saw that in the budget last night. Now, we acknowledge, Mr Speaker, that even as the national aggregate numbers turn in our favour, we know that that doesn't always immediately translate into how people are feeling and faring in the economy in communities like those represented by the member and by every member here. And that's why the cost of living help is so essential in the budget. We know that cost of living pressures are front of mind for most Australians, and dealing with the cost of living is absolutely front and centre in our budget as well that we handed down last night. And that's why it beggars belief, Mr Speaker, that when we're trying to cut taxes for every Australian worker, not one more time but two more times, those opposite came into the House today and voted against it. And what that now proves beyond any doubt, is if those opposite win the next election, Australians will be worse off, they'll be paying higher taxes, and that's because this opposition leader wants to cut everything except taxes for workers.
The call to the Shadow Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. The Albanese Labor government will bring in over 1.8 million immigrants over 5 years, whilst Labor's housing crisis escalates. When will the Treasurer come clean on the real impact of Labor's Big Australia plans?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. First of all, on housing, we're very proud to have found room in a tight budget for $33 billion in investment in building more homes for more Australians to buy and to rent. And we understand, Mr Speaker, that there's a difference between this side of the House and that side of the House. They want to cut funding for housing, and we found room to increase funding for housing because when we came to office, the construction pipeline was not what it needed to be, and we've been working as hard as we can, dedicating as much resources as we can to turning that around, Mr Speaker, and that's what we're doing. Now, what the Shadow Treasurer's question refuses to acknowledge is that net overseas migration is coming down quite substantially, and we're seeing that in the budget numbers that were released last night, Mr Speaker. There was a spike after COVID, and we have been responsibly managing down that net overseas migration in recognising that we've needed to do that, Mr Speaker. Now, if those opposite have got a different view about migration, they should say so, Mr Speaker. But what happened was the opposition leader came in here and gave a budget reply speech and said he was going to do something, and ever since then he's pretended that never happened. And somebody should tell the Leader of the Opposition that they write this stuff down. They write this stuff down. And so let's hear what those opposite intend to do, because what happened was after the Leader of the Opposition made this big pronouncement, the Shadow Treasurer went to the press club, described not by me but some of the friends upstairs as one of the worst performances they've ever seen at the press club, couldn't explain the difference between the permanent intake and the net overseas migration intake. So they should come clean, Mr Speaker. What we're doing on this side of the House is responsibly managing migration down at the same time as we build more houses. If they've got an alternative view, then they should clear it up.
Give the call to the honourable member for Reid.
My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Workplace Relations. How is the Albanese Labor government helping Australians earn more and keep more of what they earn? Are there any threats to this?
Give the call to the Leader of the House and the Minister representing the Minister for Workplace Relations.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. And I want to thank the member for Reid, because the workers in the electorate of Reid earn more because of the actions of the member for Reid, and they keep more of what they earn because of the votes of the member for Reid here in this chamber, which is not the case for every member of this chamber, because on everything about how much people earn in Australia and on how much they get to keep of what they earn, you have found members on this side voting in favour of people earning more and keeping more of what they earn, and those opposite voting for lower wages and to hike taxes. And they've done it the whole term and right through to today. There's a series of policies that they'd already announced. Every one of them went in different ways to undoing what we'd done to get wages moving. Perhaps the most iconic being removing the right to disconnect, because as the Prime Minister noted a few minutes ago, on the right to disconnect, they don't actually object to you working from home, they just object to you being paid when you're working from home. That's the bit that they've got a problem with. Because what's happened with wages? When they were in office, their final 5 quarters, real wages fell. Every one of those 5 quarters. For the last 5 quarters, every single one of those quarters, real wages have grown. Workers as well who've been held back because of non-compete clauses, where the current employer can actually prevent you from going to somewhere where you would earn more. In the budget last night, the government's made clear that we'll take on those non-compete clauses, because there's lots of things an employer can lawfully do, but they should not be able to prevent you from getting the next job. Workers across Australia know what these policy changes have meant for them. Same job, same pay. Flight attendants know what it's meant for them. Mining workers know what it's meant for them. Gig workers know that there's a government here that believes we shouldn't be a country where you have to rely on tips to make ends meet. Yet those opposite believe there should be no minimum standards at all for gig workers. Flight attendants know that he'll cut and they'll pay. Mine workers know that he'll cut and they'll pay. Anyone on an award or minimum wage knows that he'll cut and they'll pay. Aged care workers, funded through this budget for pay rises, know that he'll cut and they'll pay. Early child educators working in childcare know that extra funding in the budget, criticised by those opposite, they know that he'll cut and they'll pay. Gig workers, some of the lowest paid workers in this country, know that he'll cut and they'll pay.
Order.
The only cuts he doesn't support are tax cuts.
To remind all members to use correct titles. Give the call to the honourable member Page.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Under the Albanese Labor government, the cost of groceries has now increased by 30%. This means for the average family they are around $3,000 a year worse off. Treasurer, how will 70 cents a day in 15 months' time help cash-strapped families like these that are paying thousands of dollars more at the checkout?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Well, it will help them with a combined tax cut of $50 a week to help them with the cost of living. And if the honourable member really cared about the cost of living pressures that people are confronting, he would have voted for tax cuts. And the consequence of the position that the Shadow Treasurer talked the honourable member into is that a Liberal Party came in here, given the opportunity to vote for lower income taxes, and instead voted for higher income taxes. And that's why I'm told that there's a bit of chirp on the backbench, Mr Speaker, because people don't think this is a good idea.
Treasurer,
and we don't think it's a good idea either. We think you should vote those tax cuts because if you care about the cost of living—
Treasurer will pause. Has the Treasurer completed his answer? We'll hear from the member for McEwen.
My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering tax relief for Australians in the budget? What is standing in the way of tax cuts for Australians?
The call to the Treasurer.
Speaker, I thank the member for McEwen not just for his question, but for the way that he advocates for his local community, particularly when it comes to helping them with the cost of living. And the honourable member for McEwen is one of those local members who stays focused on the main game, and if only those opposite had the same qualities and characteristics as the member for McEwen does, Mr Speaker, because he knows, and every member on this side of the House knows, that one of the most important elements of the budget we handed down last night from this dispatch box was about helping people with the cost of living, with tax cuts for every Australian taxpayer. Now, we are cutting taxes not once, not twice, but 3 times for every Australian taxpayer. Already, the vast bulk of those tax cuts are flowing, but we've topped them up twice next year and the year after. And that's all about making sure that more Australians earn more and keep more of what they earn. And in the suburbs like the ones that the member for McEwen represent, the suburbs and towns and regions and cities of this country, nothing could be more important than helping people earn more and keep more of what they earn, for all of the reasons that my ministerial colleague ran through a moment ago. Now, this does set up a very substantial contrast at the next election between this side of the House helping Australians with the cost of living and cutting taxes for every Australian taxpayer, and those opposite who have a secret agenda for cuts which will make Australians worse off. And as the minister said a moment ago, nothing could be clearer in this election. If they win the election, he will cut and Australians will pay. Now, this is the worst possible time to risk the progress that Australians are making together in our economy. Those opposites say that they want to turn back. They want to go back to higher and rising inflation and no help with the cost of living. They want to go back to stagnant wages, deliberately suppressed as a deliberate design feature of their economic policy architecture. And we've taken deliberately a different approach to wages and incomes and to tax cuts. We've done that proudly in all 4 of our budgets, and especially in the budget last night. So these tax cuts are an important way that we can help people with the cost of living, modest in isolation but substantial when combined with all of the ways that we are helping Australians with the cost of living. And every Australian should know, every Australian should know over the top of the guffawing from those opposite, that at every turn when we've tried to help people with the cost of living, those opposite have tried to prevent it. If they had their way, Australians would be thousands of dollars worse off already, and they'll be worse off still if he wins.
Give the call to the Shadow Treasurer.
My question is to the Treasurer. A short time ago, the Treasurer suggested the instant asset write-off was already budgeted for. Can the Treasurer confirm that there are no budgeted funds to extend the instant asset write-off from the 1st of July this year?
Order. Give the order. Members on my left. When people ask questions, just wait until there is even a response, rather than giving your own opinions. The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. Not for the first time, and unfortunately not for the last time, the Shadow Treasurer is confused. And he's confused between the instant asset write-off that's been in the parliament for 8 months and being held up by those opposite, which is in the budget. He's confusing that with any future further assistance that we might give to small business, Mr Speaker. Now, if he cares about small businesses, he would tell his friends in the Senate to vote for our instant asset write-off. He would stop holding it up, Mr Speaker. Small business need and deserve that instant asset write-off. If they agree with us, they should have voted for it at any point in the last 8 months. Once we get that passed, we can consider whatever further additional assistance small businesses might require. Now, Mr Speaker, in addition to that, we are providing energy bill relief for small businesses as well. And on the first occasion when we did that, those opposite didn't support that, Mr Speaker. They pretend to care about small business, and then they hold up the instant asset write-off in the Senate, and that speaks volumes for the approach that they've taken in this place and in this parliament, Mr Speaker. So as we get closer to the end of this parliamentary term, it looks like it will end like it began, us trying to help people with the cost of living and help small businesses, and those opposite opposing us at almost every turn.
There was far too much noise during that answer. If this persists, action will be taken. Give the call to the member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Minister, how does the budget help with household energy bills? And Minister, what are the risks to more affordable energy bills?
Give the call. The member for O'Connor will leave the chamber under 94A. If I just say something to the House about wanting the noise level to come down, and then you think it's okay to interject, well, that's against the spirit of the standing orders, but also incredibly disrespectful. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. The member for Lingiari represents a beautiful and important part of Australia, and she does it very, very well, Mr Speaker, and I thank her for the question. And she asked, Mr Speaker, how the Albanese government is supplying support to Australian households with energy bills. And there's a couple of ways. There's energy bill relief and there's tax cuts, Mr Speaker, both of which were in last night's budget. And what energy bill relief and tax cuts have in common is that they give support to the Australian people, but they don't get much support from the Liberal Party of Australia. That's what they have in common, Mr Speaker. $1.8 billion of energy bill relief flowing directly to the Australian people, households and small businesses. And tax cuts, Mr Speaker, when taken in total, the 3 rounds of Albanese government tax cuts, more than $2,000 a year in tax relief to the average Australian taxpayer. That is not a small amount of money. It's important relief for Australian people, Mr Speaker, when taken as a whole. Now, the member for Lingiari asked me if there's any risks to this relief. And I'm happy to be asked about relief and risks and alternative policies. Not everyone's happy to talk about the alternative policies. They don't like talking about it very much at all. And one person in particular doesn't like being asked about the alternatives, and that's our friend, the member for Hume, the Shadow Treasurer. We know he was on Insiders on the weekend. He was asked about the cost of nuclear policy, but that's not the only place he was being asked recently. He was asked recently at an AFR Business Summit. This hasn't had as much attention as the Insiders interview, I have to tell the House, but I feel obliged to correct that, Mr Speaker. He was asked at the AFR Business Summit by Phil Curry, a distinguished Australian journalist, and the question was controversial, but I'll stand by it. Question to Angus Taylor. It's on the nuclear power plants. Labor says it's $600 billion. I think your own modelling says it's $331 billion for the build and operating costs. Angus Taylor, well, both those numbers are nonsense. Phil Curry, it's your own modelling, $331 billion. Angus Taylor laughs, Mr Speaker. His only response, when caught out not knowing that his own modelling said that was the cost, was to laugh. He couldn't give an answer to the question. Well, I'll help the Shadow Treasurer out, Mr Speaker. $600 billion of taxpayers' money must be paid for. And if the Shadow Treasurer doesn't know how much it costs, the Australian people are entitled to conclude it's a big risk that those costs will be paid for by cuts to health, by cuts to education, because the only cuts the Leader of the Opposition doesn't like are tax cuts, Mr Speaker. He's for cuts in health because he tried $50 billion of cuts when he was the Minister for Health. We know they came out and said they did not support the Albanese government's education funding model, finally delivering on 15 years of work to ensure that every Australian student, regardless of whether they're in the electorate of Lingiari or the electorate of North Sydney, has access to the same support from the Australian government, Mr Speaker. We think that's a good thing. The Leader of the Opposition calls all these things wasteful spending. We know he'll cut them to pay for his nuclear fantasy.
Give the call to the member for Ryan.
Thank you, Speaker. Question to the Prime Minister. Australia's biggest environmental organisation, the Australian Conservation Foundation, said that your gutting of environment laws with the Coalition today is a sellout and means, quote, nature is more poorly protected at the end of the Albanese government's 3-year term than at the start of it. Prime Minister, was the environment better protected under Scott Morrison than you? And why has your government sold out the climate and environment?
Order. Members on my right will cease their noise. Prime Minister has the call.
I thank the member for Ryan for her question and for identifying her preference for Scott Morrison as Prime Minister, compared with the Labor government that has put in place measures including the most serious climate change policy ever put in place by any Australian government in history. A 43% target by 2030 with mechanisms to get there, the safeguard mechanisms, the capacity investment scheme, the solar sunshot program, hydrogen head start, all of these programs for batteries, programs through the National Reconstruction Fund to drive this through, programs for critical minerals and rare earths through our production tax credits. But they have the hide to come in here and suggest that Scott Morrison, who may well have been the Environment Minister as well, Mr Speaker, that is possible. That is possible. But such contempt did he have for the environment that when he was making himself Treasurer, Finance Minister, Industry Minister and everything else, he forgot to appoint himself as Environment Minister. That's how much contempt he had for the environment. But we have protected, just on Saturday, an extra 100 million hectares of Aussie ocean and bush, some $250 million program announced by our Environment Minister in the budget to meet our commitment to protect 30% of Australia's landmass by 2030. That is what we have done. We have quadrupled the size of Heard Island and McDonald Islands Marine Park, the biggest act of ocean conservation on the planet anywhere in the world in 2024. We've tripled the size of Macquarie Island Marine Park. We have blocked proposals like Clive Palmer's Big Queensland coal mine. We have doubled funding to better look after national parks, including Kakadu and Uluru. And we're working with First Nations rangers to deliver that protection of the environment, taking account of 65,000 years of knowledge. We have throughout our environment, we have invested $550 million to better protect our threatened plants and animals and to tackle the feral animals and weeds killing our native species. When it comes to the urban environment, we've got our Urban Rivers program. We have a comprehensive plan, and what's more, a lot of it would have been implemented earlier if the Greens had just voted for it.
Has concluded. The call to the honourable member for Holt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Women. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to support Australian women with the cost of living? What threats are there to this support?
The call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development, Local Government and the Minister representing the Minister for Women.
Thank you very much, and can I thank very much the member for Holt for the question. I want to wish her all the very best in the next adventure she's about to have. But it was also a real privilege to stand alongside her and the member for Bruce in Clyde North to announce investments in your electorate on important road infrastructure, on new housing estates. It was a terrific event to be there with the Victorians as well. The Albanese Labor government, of course, is not just building physical infrastructure. We are also taking real action to support women and to drive gender equality. Since 2022, we've put gender equality at the centre of decision-making, and across every single economic update we have made responsible investments to help shift the dial towards a much fairer Australia. This work has been led by the first majority women government in Australia's history, and it shows and makes a difference. It means that we've made significant and substantial investments that directly improve women's lives and support gender equality. We've increased wages in the female-dominated industries of aged care and early childhood education. We have delivered cheaper childcare. We have included more medicines like contraceptive pills and menopause hormone therapies on the PBS, and I am so proud of our Assistant Minister for Health for doing that. But also, the first time I have heard a Prime Minister in public forums talk about menopause is extraordinary for women and really significant and makes a difference for us. Invested over $4 billion in women's safety, and we've expanded paid parental leave. Our investments have seen real improvements for women earning an average $217 a week more than they were in May 2022. Women's economic participation has reached record highs, and the gender pay gap is at record lows. But of course we know all of that is risked because of the Leader of the Opposition and what his record has always been. This progress on real action for women is under threat. And who will pay for the cuts that we know are coming? Who is going to pay? Will it be the women working hard in aged care and early education, looking after our children and older Australians, who finally are receiving a fair wage? Will it be the families who are able to access better childcare? Will it be the single mothers now accessing better support to raise their children through expanded access to parenting payment single? Will it be women finally receiving superannuation on their paid parental leave? We know this guy's got form when it comes to cuts. Every single time Leader of the Opposition makes cuts, and who will it be who pays? The women of Australia.
Give the call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Small Business. Can the Minister confirm that there is no provision for the ongoing instant asset write-off of $20,000 in the budget, and that the instant asset write-off will now fall to $1,000 next year?
Give the call to the Minister for Small Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for her question. What I would say to the member opposite is, as the Treasurer has suggested, the instant asset write-off is for this financial year of $20,000, and of course those opposite have been playing around with this, as they did last year with the instant asset write-off, Mr Speaker. Last financial year it was only passed in the last week of the Parliament, of the financial year in the Parliament, Mr Speaker, and of course the legislation has been in the Parliament now for 8 months, and those opposite continue to say that they're not going to support it in its current form, Mr Speaker, but it is of course just one part of the assistance that we are providing for small business. We know that they didn't support the energy bill relief.
The minister will pause. The minister will pause. Order. The Treasurer, the Deputy Leader, is going to raise her point of order.
Is on relevance, Mr Speaker. The question was about whether there was provision in the budget for a $20,000 ongoing instant asset write-off.
Order. The minister was asked a detailed order. The Treasurer is not helping. The Deputy Leader did ask the minister. She has been relevant. She is straying into other territory, so I'll ask her to return back to the question she was asked about. She wasn't asked about alternative policies or anything else that the opposition had or had not supported. So I'll just ask her to be relevant to the question.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. As the member opposite would know, it's around $290 million of support for small businesses, and of course it was in the budget, and it's part, of course, of our budget statement that's in the budget, over $2 billion of support that we have provided to small businesses over our term.
Order. Give a call to the honourable member for Aston.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. What action is the Albanese Labor government taking to make early childhood education more affordable for families?
Give a call.
To cheaper and more accessible childcare.
Give a call to the Minister for Early Childhood Education and the Minister for Youth.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Aston for her question. Such a passionate advocate for children and families in Aston. And like all the members on this side of the House, the member for Aston has continuously voted to support the families and the children in her electorate, to support them through cost of living measures that those opposite failed to vote for, and demonstrates just how much she really cares for families and children in Aston. Now, Mr Speaker, when we came into office, we inherited an early childhood education and care sector that was in crisis. Really was in crisis. They couldn't find workers. There were all sorts of issues around, particularly around the workforce, and it was expensive. And the price kept on going up for parents. And we've made progress on reform. We've made significant progress on reform towards a quality, universal early childhood education and care service that works for every single Australian child, informed by our ACCC inquiry and by our PC inquiry. And since coming into government, there are now 42,000 more educators in the sector, around 42,000, 1,189 more services in the sector, 30% of which are outside of major cities, and around 97,000 more children in early childhood education and care. Our cheaper childcare reforms decreased the out-of-pocket costs by 17% when they were first introduced. Now, that means an average family is $4,400 better off. $4,400 better off. We're building on that, of course, by capping fee increases as part of our worker wage rise. Recently, we introduced our 3-day guarantee, scrapping the Liberals' prohibitive activity test. That means 70,000 families will save $1,370 a year. Now, our reform rests on retaining and building a strong workforce. That's why we have a policy for fee-free TAFE. That's why we increased the wages of early childhood educators. But, Mr Speaker, our reform does not stop there. We know there's more to do. We've got $1 billion set aside to build early childhood education and care services where they're needed, and a service delivery price which will help us underpin future reform. But I'm asked about threats. And let us start by the fact that the opposition has absolutely no plan, no vision and no policy for early childhood education and care. Instead, it has a plan to cut essential services, a secret plan to cut essential services.
Order.
We want to build,
the minister's
they want to cut.
time has concluded. Call to the honourable member for Kooyong.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is for the Minister for Small Business. Minister, the instant asset write-off bill is before the House at the moment. If it's not passed this week, the small businesses of Kooyong won't get that tax write-off. Do you commit that you will put it through the House today so that it can go to the Senate and that the small businesses of Kooyong can benefit from this measure in this financial year?
Call to the Minister for Small Business.
Thank you, Mr.
Order.
Speaker, and I do thank the member for that question, and I understand her concern and her support for small businesses. We, of course, also want certainty for small businesses across Australia, which is why, of course, we introduced the legislation back in June, because, of course, we saw what those opposite did with the instant asset write-off last financial year, and we wanted to provide that certainty and support for small businesses. What I can say to the member opposite is if those opposite want to commit to get it through this financial year, we will see what we can do. But what I would say to the member opposite is they obviously can't be trusted in terms of the instant asset write-off. They did play around with it last financial year. As I said, it only passed the parliament in the dying days of last financial year. So for this financial year, of course, if they want to make a commitment that we can get it through and speedily get it through, we'll see what we can do. But more importantly, we are looking at ways that we can ensure to give small businesses the certainty they need when it comes to the instant asset write-off and, of course, the targeted support that we are providing small businesses.
Call to the honourable member for Patterson.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Veterans Affairs and Defence Personnel. How is the Albanese Labor government supporting veterans, Minister, and are there any threats to this?
Give the call to the Minister for Veterans Affairs and the Minister for Defence Personnel.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Patterson for that very important question. And she's a great advocate for the veterans in her community. I visited the East Maitland RSL with her a number of times. It's great to visit and meet the local veterans in her community in Patterson. Under the Albanese government, DVA is the best resource that it has been in decades. Veterans and families are now receiving the services and support that they need faster. We've employed an additional 640 staff in DVA since we came to government in 2022, and we've cleared the unallocated claims backlog of some 42,000 claims that we inherited. Now, this has led to more demand for support and services to actually be provided to veterans and families, supports and services that veterans deserved, but they were prevented from receiving by the last Liberal government because they weren't processing veterans' claims. Now, our success in processing claims has meant that more veterans are now lodging more claims with more conditions per claim, because they now actually have confidence that their claims will actually be processed. Now, in February 2025, all new initial liability claims are being allocated to a staff member within 14 days. But back in 2022, under the last government, it was taking around 200 days. But let's look at what they were dealing with back then. Back in 2021-22, there was just under 66,000 claims lodged with the Department of Veterans Affairs. Last financial year, it was 89,530, and in the just 8 months to February of this year, we've already had 65,412 new claims lodged with DVA. Back under the last government, 2021-22, they made 94,629 decisions in the whole year. Last financial year, DVA made 200,200 decisions. And in this financial year, to February, just 8 months, 148,294 decisions have been made. So we can see why it's important to maintain the staffing levels in DVA so that those staff can keep doing the vital work to process claims and provide services and support to our veterans. And yet we saw earlier in the week Senator Hume, the Shadow Minister for Finance, saying that the opposition thought that they should roll back those additional staff that have gone into DVA. Now, Senator Lambie, a great advocate on behalf of veterans across this country, called Senator Hume out on this on television just this morning. Senator Hume seemed to have some form of amnesia. She didn't know what Senator Lambie was talking about all of a sudden, but it's okay, because Natalie Barr reminded Senator Hume that it is the opposition's policy to roll back on the additional public servants that our government has hired. We know what will happen under this opposition. They will cut and you will pay.
Give the call to the Shadow Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will Australia's government gross debt hit more than $1 trillion next year?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Well, that's what it says in the budget, Mr. Speaker. And the interesting thing about that, from an opposition point of view, is that when we came to office, we inherited that $1 trillion of debt. And what that's meant, what we've been able to do, because of our responsible economic management, is debt is down $177 billion this year compared to what those opposite left us with. And that's because we delivered two surpluses which would have been absolutely unrecognisable to those opposite, Mr. Speaker. When we came to office, the budget was already weighed down with $1 trillion of debt in a budget which was absolutely chockers with rorts and waste, for which the Shadow Treasurer made a contribution. And so we've gone about making sure that we manage the budget in the most responsible way. We found almost $100 billion in savings. We've banked most of the upward revisions to revenue. And because of that, we delivered the first two surpluses in almost 2 decades. And we shrunk the deficit this year as well, Mr. Speaker, and we're making progress. And so if those opposite really cared about debt, they wouldn't have left us with $1 trillion of it. And they wouldn't have left us a budget which was weighed down with rorts and waste. We inherited a big mess from those opposite, and we've been cleaning it up. And because of our efforts, the budget bottom line over the years that we take responsibility for are $207 billion stronger than they were under those opposite, Mr. Speaker, who promised a surplus in the first year and every year thereafter and went precisely none for nine when it comes to surpluses, and we've delivered two. Now, we understand, Mr. Speaker, that the task of responsible economic management and budget repair is ongoing. In every single one of our 4 budgets we've found savings, and people should expect that to be the case in the future too, if we get the opportunity.
Give a call to the honourable member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering more choice and cheaper medicines for Australian women? Why is it important to deliver more choice, lower costs and better healthcare options? And what are the risks?
Call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thanks, Speaker, and I thank the member. Along with the Assistant Minister for Health, the member for Macquarie and the vast number of women on this side of the House consistently remind me that you can't be serious about strengthening Medicare without a strong focus on women's health, because women consume about 60% of all healthcare services in this country, and they face huge lifetime health costs, not because they're sick, but because they're women, in areas like contraception, reproductive health, and during perimenopause and menopause, Mr. Speaker. And this term, a couple of really important Senate inquiries have lifted the lid on literally decades of neglect, revealing a very deep sense among so many Australian women that they're just not listened to, that their symptoms are often minimised or even fully discounted in the healthcare system. Well, Mr. Speaker, we have heard that message loud and clear, and last night's budget includes almost $800 million to deliver Australia's women more choice, better care and lower costs, Mr. Speaker. It's extraordinary to me, Mr. Speaker, that it is more than 30 years since a new oral contraceptive pill has been added to the PBS, a bunch of them added to the private market and registered with the TGA. This year already we've added 3 new pills, including the only single hormone pill, Slinda, which is used by about 100,000 Australian women who've been paying top dollar in the private market. Jemima from St Kilda, who's 42, she wrote to us and said, "I've been taking the pill since I was 17, but as I've got older I wanted to know more about the progestogen-only pill. I've been taking Slinda for 18 months, but the cost does add up. All contraceptives should be affordable. This PBS listing is going to deliver huge benefit and opportunity for so many women, Mr Speaker. And it's not just contraception. For more than 20 years, not a single new menopause hormone treatment was added to the PBS. This year already, we've added 3, ensuring that around 150,000 women every year will save up to $400. And for more than 30 years, there was not a single new medicine added for endometriosis, a condition that impacts about 1 million Australian women. In the last 6 months, we've added 2, including most recently one that will save women almost $3,000 a year. We're also opening more endo and pelvic pain clinics. We're increasing funding for GPs to provide support during menopause and for the insertion and removal of long-acting contraception. After literally decades of no action in these areas at all from the former government, Australia's women are finally getting the support that they deserve and they need from a stronger Medicare. We've done more in the budget last night, Mr Speaker, than literally has been done for decades. It's the sort of action you only get from a Labor government.
Give the call to the Shadow Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. I refer to the government's increase to the migration program to 1.8 million people over 5 years. Will the Treasury guarantee it will not go higher than 1.8 million?
Order. The member for Moreton is warned. The Leader of the House has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. So good to get a question from them on net overseas migration, because if there is ever a gap between their rhetoric and what they've done, it's on this issue. It's on this issue. The latest figures that came out only last week showed a 31% fall in net overseas migration year on year. A 31% fall. And what measure that what had been a particularly fast-growing area of net overseas migration had been student visas. The government's action on student visas also a 31% fall. A 31% fall. But when we put that measure to the parliament, which way did they vote on student visas? They voted for student visas to be unlimited. Well, this government's taken action. Oh, you don't like it, do you? It's terribly sad. But it's the record you're responsible for.
Order.
And there's a lot more to come.
Order.
There's plenty more to come.
The Leader of the House. Order. We're just going to do this in an orderly fashion. We're going to hear from the manager, who's entitled to raise a point of order. We'll deal with his point of order, and then we will rule on that and work through back to the minister. Okay?
Let the peacock parade continue.
Oh, the Leader of the Opposition.
Sorry.
You know, fair go. We don't need anything ever like that said. The manager of Opposition on a point of order.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. The point of order is on relevance. In an environment of record high migration, it's fair that we ask a very tight question about the government policy. We've seen in successive budgets the budget amount of migration and the actual amount vary quite significantly, with much higher migration in reality than what is budgeted. The question is therefore very tight about whether the government guarantees that the 1.8 million migrants that they budgeted for won't be exceeded.
The manager's made his order. The manager was given a bit of licence there, but he knows that's not the normal approach, but he was entitled to have his say. I was listening carefully because it was a tight question, but the minister was giving facts and figures around net migration. He wasn't. Well, he was giving information about net migration. If he strays off into alternative approaches or policy, which he wasn't asked about, we'll deal with that. But while he's giving facts and figures, I don't know what he's going to say in terms of net migration, but he is talking about that and being directly relevant. I know you wanted an answer about a guarantee. I can't get him to do that. But while he's giving numbers and facts and figures to the parliament, he is being directly relevant. So he has the call.
Thanks, Speaker. And of course, with net migration, the key driver that any government has over it is how many visas you issue. How many visas you issue. So there are some visas where we've taken action, like we have with respect to student visas, action which they voted to make unlimited. Other actions we've taken, for example, we got rid of the golden ticket visa, one of the things that would feed into net migration figures. The golden ticket visa, the one that we previously described as cash for visas, something that the Leader of the Opposition wants to bring back. But the overriding control you have in immigration is how many visas you issue. Now, in terms of the concept of record highs on that input, it has only happened twice in Australian history that a Minister for Home Affairs or Immigration has issued more than 9 million visas. It's only happened twice. It wasn't myself as Minister. It wasn't my predecessors. Who possibly would have issued more than 9 million visas 2 consecutive years? No one else has caught up with this record.
The Leader of the House. Order. Members on my right. The Minister for Health, the manager on a further point of order.
Yeah, point of order is 91C. You were very clear in your direction to the minister. He's now willfully ignoring your, I think, quite direct suggestion, Mr. Speaker, and he should come back to the question. It was very tight. It was about the 1.8 million migrants in the budget.
Yes, and the minister is talking about that. I don't know what he's. I can guess where he's going to go with this. But I'll just ask the minister one more time to make sure he's being directly relevant in terms of the figures that he's referring to, and he'll need to make it relevant to the question he was asked about the 1.8 million figure in this budget.
Yeah, and Mr. Speaker, the biggest driver for any minister of net overseas migration is the number of visas they issue. No one has ever issued more visas in Australian history than the Leader of the Opposition when he held this portfolio.
Order. 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 When the House comes to order, we're just going. The Minister for Housing will cease interjecting. The member for Barker will just stop interjecting. So when the House now has come to order, and everyone's listening, we'll hear from the member for Parramatta.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care. How is the Albanese Labor government supporting aged care workers with pay rises and tax cuts? Are there any threats to this?
Give a call to the Minister for Health, the Minister for Aged Care, and the Minister for Sport. Sorry.
I thank the member for Parramatta for his question and for his commitment to restoring dignity to all of the recipients of aged care in his electorate. Mr. Speaker, there aren't many more jobs more important than what our aged care workers do. Being an aged care worker is physically, emotionally draining work, and it's highly skilled work. I saw this firsthand during ex-tropical cyclone Alfred when I visited Emma and her team at Mercy Community Services in Nudgee. In preparation for gale force winds and torrential rain, Emma, Grace, Kamala, Salushana, Isha and others all packed their overnight bags and they left their own homes to do double and sometimes triple shifts and even sleep over at the nursing homes to make sure that their residents got the care that they needed. But you wouldn't have known how important aged care workers were based on what they were paid under consecutive coalition governments. For too long, women like Emma, Grace, Kamala, Salushana and Isha were undervalued and underpaid. And that's not because these jobs aren't skilled or important. It was because these jobs are predominantly done by women. In last night's budget, the Treasurer announced another $2.6 billion to deliver pay rises to nurses working in aged care. And that means that since 2023, the Albanese government have invested $17.7 billion to increase the award wage for more than 400,000 aged care workers. Under the Albanese government, registered nurses are earning an extra $430 a week. That is $22,000 a year. And with Labor's tax cuts, they're keeping an extra $2,667 in their pocket. With Labor's investment in Medicare, they will be able to see a bulk billing GP. With Labor's plan for cheaper medicine, they won't pay more than $25 for their PBS script. With Labor's investment in affordable housing, they will have more help to buy a home with a lower deposit. The Albanese government is firmly focused on the issues that matter to Australians, easing the cost of living while fighting inflation and helping people earn more and cutting their taxes to help them keep more of what they earn. The only thing the Coalition will not cut is your taxes.
Call to the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, you got anything? I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
Order. Order. Members can leave the chamber quickly and quietly. She'll move to papers, and I call the Leader of the House.
Speaker, these documents are tabled in accordance with the list circulated to the honourable members earlier today. Full details of the documents will be recorded in the votes and proceedings.